Aimee Lee, an Oberlin graduate, shares her process working with hanji, Korean paper, and traditional fiber techniques. In this video, Lee shares her journey traveling to Korea in search of a connection to her heritage through art, culture, and papermaking, and how that road led to creating a home for hanji in Northeast Ohio. You've mentioned before that your interest in Korean art was sparked by work at the Allen Memorial Art Museum. What's that story?
When I was at Oberlin doing my fulfilling requirements for my art major, I took a class in Chinese art history. It was specifically on landscape paintings taught by Robert Harris. And we went to the Allen to look at scrolls that we were told had just been acquired by the museum. And they were old paintings that one of the curators unrolled, and he mentioned, oh, this one happens to be on Korean paper because Chinese painters sometimes preferred Korean paper. And it was the first time in my life I remember, so really the only kind of real big light bulb moment that I've had where my whole head just filled with light, and I thought, why am I studying Chinese art? I don't know anything about Korean art. What is this Korean paper? I didn't even think about the paper part. I just thought, how can I ever connect with Korean art if I don't have a good grasp of the Korean language anymore, because it was my first language, but it had kind of been erased as I went through the school system in the US. So I pretty much after that class called my parents and said, this summer instead of music camp, can you send me to Korea to study Korean? And they were shocked because I was obsessed with being a violinist, and but they said okay. And that was the beginning of me relearning Korean, and then I had 10 years of practice before I applied eventually for Fulbright, and then I could do the research on Korean paper in the native language.
What was your experience in Korea?
I was really fortunate to be able to find one hanji teacher who would take me, and this was after many months of knocking on doors. And I had written to him and another teacher prior to coming to Korea, but when I was on the ground, I felt discouraged by a few different things that made me decide I couldn't go to him right away, and I didn't want to study with the other person. So I traveled around the countryside as soon as I landed, and I just met different paper makers, and most of them just thought I was a very strange weirdo, that why would they teach this single woman who was already to them an old maid because I was 30 and unmarried, and I didn't look really very strong. So this was something that was done traditionally by men, at least the sheet forming part, which is the part that I really wanted to learn, because I already knew how to make paper by then because I had studied it in graduate school. I just didn't know the Korean techniques. So I for months looked for someone, and then finally when I actually met this teacher and I asked him, where can I learn this very specific sheet formation technique in Korea, given the fact that this person said no, he said, oh, the only place you can come is our place, and you can come visit. And after that, all the doors opened, because I started working there, and I was living just a 20-minute walk away from the paper mill. And during the breaks, because he was really worried about me being too cold, because it's really, really cold in January, and especially that part of Korea, he would give me books and things to read. He would teach me other kinds of crafts so that I could be in a warmer space in between being at the cold vat. And I realized, oh, I need to learn so much more than just about paper making. What did Korean people do with paper? How did they create colors for it? What are the things that humans are just attracted to? And so after I studied with him, he introduced me to a Jisung teacher who was teaching me paper basketry and how to cord and twine, basically make sculptural objects out of paper. And then I also found a natural dyeing teacher, and I experimented with how natural dyeing on paper is very different from fabric, and I found a calligraphy teacher, and I had already found a jumchi teacher who had taught me how to texture infuse hanji, which was remains a big part of my practice. And So the first half of the year with the Fulbright was just a lot of doors kind of slammed in my face, and then the second half was all just doors opening. So it was life-changing, and it really set my trajectory for the rest of my life in terms of really wanting to immerse myself completely in Korean papermaking traditions, and then what I could do with that going forward in my own artwork.
What role do different fibers play in your work?
When I did more research on previous papermakers like Winifred Lutz, who had tested North American fibers for Japanese papermaking techniques, I thought this is probably going to be very similar to the techniques I learned, so let's go through the list of what she's looked at. And milkweed always came up as a great option, and milkweed happens to be extremely abundant and native in Northeast Ohio, really important for monarch flyways and pollinators. So I started using milkweed, and I had a great residency in Michigan at Albion College, where I took a whole hanji vat, portable vat that I designed with a student, and started testing the fibers that I was harvesting there, and I realized, wow, milkweed actually works almost better than paper mulberry. It's just so lustrous and so beautiful, and it kind of settles on the screen in a certain way and imparts in a certain way that makes it seem like it was almost born to make this kind of paper. And so for me, it becomes another way of imbuing the art and the paper with my experience as a Korean American. It's an American fiber using Korean techniques to make this kind of hybrid paper.
How does sustainability inform your work?
There is always this sense of what is my responsibility, what is my role in the world, what is my impact based on the things that I'm doing and the things that I'm making. And even at Oberlin, I remember a lot of this was just out of financial need. I made a lot of found art. I would just use whatever I found or had and repurpose things, and I still do that to this day, except now it's things that maybe it's scraps of paper that I've been hoarding for 20 years. And I don't even think of it as hoarding, I think of it as tending, or in the Korean tradition, aging, that you're actually supposed to let paper rest for at least 10 years before you use it, because the fibers need to really settle and really combine with each other in its more mature state. And so when I discovered that paper is made out of plants, and I think many paper makers have this experience, they realize, oh, I don't have to destroy something or kind of create something that is harmful to the environment in order to make my work. And in fact, I can use plants that either we have too much of, or they've reached the point in their life cycle that it's safe and okay to harvest them and use them, and that these pieces then, if I really wanted, once I'm gone, that can all be returned to the earth and composted. And so that is always something that's underneath the things that I'm doing, and the more and more I learn about Korean culture, the more I see that that was embedded in that tradition as well, that when you made clothing, the virtue for each woman doing the sewing, because it was women, is the most virtuous is to use every last scrap, is to have nothing left. And you'd see just tiny little ornamentation and the care that they took and how they would attach them to garments. And that was an indication, for example, with a child's garment, of how much a child was loved because of all of the extra little fabric pieces. And those things inspire me when I'm working with all my little paper scraps, that I try to make the most of every piece, and then knowing that even if I fail at sewing every piece, I can always repulp it and make more paper.
Can you tell us about the works displayed in the case?
I was always taught as a paper maker to have sample books, so I know what day did I harvest, what part of the plant, how did I cook it, how much alkaline, how long did it sit before I started to beat it, and things like that. And I thought there must be a way, because I work with artist books, which I learned to make at Oberlin, there must be a way to combine narrative storytelling into an actual sample book. And then it's what I love to do again, which is this mashup of just combining things, and also almost a way of being more efficient. So I have everything in one place and it serves multiple roles. So in this one, I'm looking at the relationship between indigo and paper, indigo and textiles. And so a lot of this has been indigo dyed, and I've been using two different types of indigo. So I was lucky enough to study with Gasali Adeyemo, who is a Nigerian indigo artist based in Santa Fe. And the Yoruba technique of making indigo is so different from what we use a lot here, which is the Japanese technique. And the plants are different, and the color is really different. The techniques are different, really surprisingly so. And so I wanted to combine both types of indigo. And then the cover itself actually is not at all indigo dyed. It's all hanji that I had aged again for at least 10, if not 15 years from my first teacher, Chang Seong-woo at Changjibang. And I wanted to kind of match the colors, but I knew that I couldn't get it I didn't want to use indigo in this case. And so I just did a lot of mixing acrylics with methyl cellulose and just doing many, many different layers and different kind of treatments to make it match. And I included the bark grid. So again, it's the paper mulberry tree, the inner bast fiber that's used to make these grids. And then I kept track of what each thing was. So in italics, you have the label of what it actually is technically. And then there's a narrative that goes through it. And this one, in kind of size and in color, was inspired by these lace sample books that I had seen that were made in Switzerland at a show all about the power of lace in New York. And there were just these giant sample books with lace in each page, and there were all these blue pages, and it was a huge book. And I just thought, I usually work on a smaller scale, but I just thought it would be fun to be able to work really big. And so what you can't see here are all of the other experiments that I did with indigo, dyeing of different fibers that would be used for paper making, or dyeing the paper itself, or even dyeing the bark grids or the bark lace, and a narrative flowing through it as well about kind of bearing witness to this process.
What about the two small dresses?
So the two small dresses are more experiments in using the prints that I was making, and a lot of times, again, in that way of recycling or going from one piece to the next. The one with many, many pleats and the bark lace printing was, they were essentially the leftover prints from a project I was doing about the global traditions of bark cloth, bark lace, and the way that it was used all over the world and not recognized anymore as kind of an important precursor to what we're doing now in paper making and textiles. But all the plants come from the same family, or very similar families. So anything that would be good for bark cloth or bark lace is really good for paper, is really good for textiles. And so I wanted to not waste any of those prints, and I was trying to figure out, how can I make this work?
Can you tell us about the works displayed on the wall?
The first piece of these that I made was on the far right. So that piece that was the first time I learned chumchi, which is a method of texturing and fusing paper, and I learned that from the late Kim Kyung. She tried to find old artifacts that people had in their homes made out of hanji, and she would collect them. And she taught me this way of, basically, in this particular lesson, it was to take full sheets of white paper and then take sheets that I had to tear into these circles or into lint, essentially, just tear paper so fine that it's almost like just puffs of fiber, and then create different patterns. And she made me do this for several different sheets. And then I would have to, you add water and you crumple it up and you keep massaging it, and it helps all of the pieces actually bond together without any adhesive. And so it's just water that's helping reactivate hydrogen bonds in the cellulose that is contained in these fibers of the paper. And then she told me, okay, now you should back it with interfacing and then make a dress and then find a famous person to model it and then take a picture and then give me the pictures in the dress. And I thought, oh, okay, I'm not going to do that. I have other things to do. I have to do a lot of research, and I just forgot about it. And then when it was time for me to leave Korea, my aunt, who had introduced me to this teacher, said, well, this is very disrespectful that you didn't do what she wanted, so you should actually give all the paper back to her as kind of payment. And then 7 years later, I went back to Korea, and I happened to stay with this aunt again, and there was this box that she was cleaning out a closet, and this box looked very familiar, and I opened it, and all my paper was in there because she hadn't actually brought it back to Kim Kyung. So I thought, well, I met Kim Kyung on this next visit, and she's so far into dementia and essentially kind of on her deathbed that I think I should just take this paper, and I think I should honor her wishes and make a dress. And then I didn't get the famous person, but I at least made the dress. And once I did that, there were many offcuts. And in this idea, again, of never wasting and wanting to use every last bit, I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll make a child-sized dress. And then I did that, which is this one, because the first one was an adult size. And then out of that are more offcuts. And then I said, okay, I'll make a doll-sized dress. And then more offcuts. There's no end. And then it just started me thinking more about, not even thinking, but just the act of being able to create garments out of paper. And these technically are wearable, but then thinking of them more as art, and to the point where they're not anymore. So this one is also based off of a pattern for a child, and it was using hanji that I had dyed with calligraphy ink that I ground by hand, which is what I learned from my calligraphy teacher, and then created, and all of these I sew on the sewing machine because hanji can handle all of that, especially after it's been textured in this way. So it's been intentionally kind of wrinkled in this junchi method. And then I started to think, why am I, again, that same feeling of, why am I doing this when I could be doing that? I realized, oh, these are all Western dress. This is all Western dress pattern. If I'm working with hanji, what if I look at Korean dress patterns? And so the most iconic Korean dress is the hanbok, which is literally, it translates to Korean clothing. And I started working with this design, and so I did both adult size and child size and doll size, but it became kind of like practicing. It's almost like practicing scales as a musician, that you just keep doing the same thing over and over, and you know that in that you learn how to perfect the technique. And so this one in particular combines many different techniques. So it's not just the paper making, but it's the dyeing, the natural dyeing. All the brown comes from persimmon juice, and then all the different colors, the indigo, cochineal, and then also it combines printmaking. And in this one, a lot of the black relief prints that look like bark lace, or that look like lace, are made out of the bark that would make the paper, but instead of making it into paper, there's a step after you cook it that you can spread it out and dry it flat, and it turns into this very stiff kind of material that you can use to do anything with, really. And in this case, I inked it up and I printed it on an etching press, relief printing, and then that was kind of the way that I was creating pattern on top of the color, on top of the paper, because I wanted in this series of work to make dresses that completed the circle for the life cycle of the plant, that the plant can become paper, but the plant can also be, so the plant can become the substrate and the plant can become the matrix. The plant becomes the pattern, the plant becomes the design, and it's all from the same plant, just to show everything that this one plant can do. And then this piece called Multi is actually something that was really inspired by my Oberlin students. So every winter term I teach a papermaking into bookmaking class, and I had 2 students one year who were obviously Asian multiracial students, and I asked them one day, how do you like to identify, like, how do you deal with people asking you, like, what are you, where are you from, which of course terrible things to be asked. And they said, well, we actually have an organization where we've gathered and we figured out for ourselves that we just like to be called multi, because that's what we are. And I was inspired by that idea that the people who are that thing get to decide what they're called. And so these are all different kinds of hanji that I made or dyed or printed on or held on to for many years, all kind of coming together in the sense that even if it doesn't look like on the surface that we are made up of many, many different people and ancestors, we are. And so that those things all come to create one whole.